The stars were dimmed by the heavy clouds above. On the battlefield, the air was thick with the smell of burning metal and the sound of distant explosions. Kyle, a human soldier, moved swiftly through the broken ruins of an alien city. His mission was clear: rescue the alien queen, Lyra, who had been captured by their enemies. Time was running out, and the stakes were high. If the queen died in captivity, the enemy would gain a powerful ally, and the war would shift in their favor. Kale's heart raced as he crouched behind a pile of rubble. The walls of the fortress loomed in front of him, tall and fortified. He had trained for this moment, but the reality of it was different. His mission had been dangerous from the start, but now it felt even more real. If he failed, it would mean the end of hope for the galaxy. The queen had to be saved. As he peered around the corner, Kale saw two guards posted outside the fortress entrance. Their eyes scanned the area, unaware of the human soldier just steps away. He waited patiently, listening to the distant hum of energy shields and the constant thud of footsteps above. This was no ordinary rescue. Lyra was not just any prisoner. She was the heart of her people, the one who held their empire together. Without her, the galaxy would fall into chaos. Kale had never met the queen before, but he had heard stories of her strength. Her race was known for their intelligence, beauty, and fierce loyalty to their people. She was respected throughout the galaxy, feared by their enemies, and admired by her allies. Saving her wasn't just about winning the war. It was about saving the future. He took a deep breath, pushing aside the fear that gripped his chest. He had a job to do. In one swift move, Kale silenced the guards with well-practiced skill. The first one went down silently, and the second followed moments later. He made his way to the entrance, his heart pounding. The door was locked, but a simple tool from his belt was all he needed to bypass the security system. It clicked open with a soft hiss, and Kale slipped inside. The fortress was silent. Too silent. Kyle moved quickly through the corridors, his boots barely making a sound on the cold metal floors. The walls were adorned with strange symbols, alien writing that he could barely understand. This place was a far cry from the human ships he was used to. Everything about it felt foreign, alien in a way that was both terrifying and awe-inspiring. After what felt like hours of navigating the dark hallways, Kale finally reached the holding cells. He could hear muffled sounds behind the walls, voices, and strange noises that sent a chill down his spine. His target was near. He stopped in front of the largest cell, his breath catching in his throat as he looked inside. There she was, Queen Lyra. Her eyes were closed and her hands were bound to the wall by thick, glowing chains. The sight of her, so powerful yet so vulnerable, struck him deeply. She was beautiful, unlike anyone he had ever seen. Her skin shimmered in the dim light, and her long hair flowed like liquid silver. Despite her restraint, there was a fierceness in the way she held herself. She was a queen, and even in captivity, she radiated authority. Kyle hesitated for a moment, unsure of how to proceed. He had been trained for combat, for battles and wars, but nothing in his training had prepared him for the weight of this moment. This was no ordinary rescue mission. This was the queen of an entire species, a living legend. He couldn't afford to fail. He shook off the doubts in his mind and moved closer to her. The chains that bound her glowed with a strange energy, but Kale was prepared. He had brought with him a device designed to neutralize alien technology like this. With quick hands, he attached the device to the chains, and they began to crackle and spark. Slowly, the glow faded and the chains loosened. Kale took a step back as the queen's eyes fluttered open. They were a deep, radiant shade of purple, like two twin galaxies swirling in the darkness. She blinked at him, her gaze sharp, as if she were unsure whether to trust him or not. "You," she whispered, her voice strong despite her weakened state. "Who are you?" "I'm here to get you out of here," Kyle said, his voice steady, but low. "I'm here to rescue you." Lyra studied him for a moment, her expression unreadable. For a brief second, Cale thought she might resist, but instead she nodded slightly, as if recognizing the truth in his words. She was a queen, but even she knew when to trust someone. Without another word, Cale helped her to her feet, supporting her as they moved toward the exit. The walls of the fortress seemed to close in on them, and Kyle knew they had little time. The enemy would soon realize that the queen had escaped. As they reached the outer courtyard, the sound of blaster fire echoed in the distance. Cale's heart raced, but he didn't stop. He kept moving, his grip on the queen tightening. Lyra's feet moved slower now, the effects of her captivity taking their toll. But there was something in her eyes, an unwavering strength that gave Cale hope. They reached the edge of the courtyard, where a small ship was waiting for them. The plan had been to make a quick escape, but now it seemed more complicated than ever. As they boarded the ship, Cale looked back at the fortress, feeling a strange sense of finality. This wasn't just about getting the queen out alive. It was about ensuring that the galaxy's future remained intact. Lyra took a seat, her eyes still fixed on Cale. "Why are you doing this?" she asked, her voice low. "You are only human." "Why risk your life for mine?" Kyle hesitated, then looked at her with a determination that came from deep within. "Because you're not just a queen. You're the key to everything. The galaxy needs you." Lyra seemed to consider his words, but before she could respond, the ship's engines roared to life. Cale piloted the craft into the sky, watching. The fortress grew smaller as they ascended into the clouds. The battle was far from over, but for now they were safe. For now. The stars were endless, scattered across the vastness of space like tiny diamonds. The small ship Kyle had stolen cut through the void, its engines humming quietly as it drifted farther from the enemy fortress. Inside the cramped cockpit, Kyle was focused, his eyes fixed on the controls. He had never been this far from home, and though he had saved the queen, the hardest part of his mission was just beginning. Lyra sat beside him, her gaze far away, her expression unreadable. She had said little since their escape. She was exhausted, physically drained from the captivity she had endured. But Kyle knew it was more than that. She was a queen, strong, proud, and resilient, being rescued by a human, someone she had never met before, must have shaken her to the core. Kyle glanced over at her. The alien queen's beauty was striking, even in her weakened state. Her skin, a deep shade of violet, shimmered under the dim light of the cockpit. Her long silver hair flowed behind her like a river of moonlight. There was a coldness in her eyes, but Cale had seen glimpses of something else, a spark of curiosity. He decided to break the silence. "You're safe now," he said softly, though he wasn't sure if she was even listening. Lyra turned her gaze toward him, her eyes sharp. "I know you saved me," she said, her voice calm but strong. "But I don't understand why." Kyle swallowed, unsure of how to respond. He had asked himself the same question ever since the moment he had stepped into the fortress to save her. Why had he risked his life for someone he didn't even know? Why had he felt so compelled to protect her? "I didn't want to see anyone else suffer," Cale finally replied. "And I've seen what happens when people like you are taken. The war gets worse. I couldn't just let it happen." Lyra seemed to consider his words for a long moment, her eyes never leaving his face. Then she nodded slowly, as if processing something important. "You humans, you risk everything without a second thought. You're strange." Cale smiled slightly. "We do that sometimes. The Queen's gaze softened for a brief second. Before she looked away, her mind clearly elsewhere. She was thinking about her people. Kale could tell. The weight of her crown still hung heavily on her shoulders even though she was free for the moment. "We're headed to a safe place," Kyle continued, breaking the silence again. "I know a place where we can lay low for a while. It's on the outskirts of the galaxy. We'll be out of range of enemy forces." Lyra nodded, though she didn't seem entirely convinced. "I can't hide forever," she said quietly. "I have a responsibility to my people. They need me." Kale's brow furrowed. "They'll need you even more once you're well enough to lead them again. But first, you need rest. I can't imagine what you've gone through." Lyra didn't reply, and Kale didn't press the matter. The journey ahead was long, and they both had time to think. He focused back on the controls, his hands steady, guiding the ship through the dark stretch of space. Hours passed in silence, broken only by the soft hum of the ship's engine and the occasional beep of the navigation system. As the ship moved deeper into the unknown, Lyra finally spoke again, her voice softer this time. "You do not fear me," she said, her words slow, as if testing the waters. Kale shook his head, glancing over at her again. "I don't fear you. I know you're strong, but I also know you're more than just a queen. You're a person." Lyra's eyes narrowed slightly, though there was a flicker of something in her gaze, something that almost looked like relief. "People fear me. They fear what I represent." "That's because they don't understand you," Kale said. "People tend to fear what they don't understand." Lyra fell silent again, her eyes far away. She was thinking about her people, Kale could tell. Her race, the Lyrans, were known throughout the galaxy for their intelligence, beauty, and fierce independence. They had built an empire, one that had lasted for centuries. But now, that empire was on the brink of collapse. Lyra's capture was only the beginning. The enemy factions were closing in, and her leadership was being questioned by her own advisors. She had become a symbol of power, but also a target. "I was never meant to be a symbol," Lyra said suddenly, as if reading Kale's mind. "I was meant to lead. But now I am just a figurehead. A puppet to those who wish to control me." Kyle frowned, unsure of how to respond. "You're more than that," he said quietly. "I saw you fight. You're strong. You can lead again." Lyra's lips twitched at the corners as if she almost smiled. "Do you really think so?" "I know so," Kale replied with quiet conviction. For a long time, neither of them spoke. The ship glided through the stars, the galaxy stretching out before them. There was something about the silence between them that felt different now. Lyra was beginning to trust him. Kale could feel it. She wasn't just the queen of a dying empire anymore. She was a person, and Kale was determined to help her find her way back to the leader she was meant to be. They finally arrived at their destination, an old, abandoned research station on the outskirts of the galaxy. The station was small, hidden away from prying eyes. It wasn't much, but it would be enough for them to rest and regroup. As the ship touched down, Kale turned to Lyra. "We're here. You can rest now." Lyra didn't answer at first, but then she nodded slowly. "Thank you, Kale," she said, softly, her voice quieter than it had ever been. "You saved me, and for that I will owe you more than you know." Kyle smiled, though he didn't know what to say. He had never been one for thanks. But hearing her words felt like a promise, one that could change everything. As they exited the ship and stepped into the quiet, empty station, Kale couldn't help but feel that this was only the beginning. The Queen had been rescued, but now, together, they would have to face a future neither of them could predict. The quiet research station was a far cry from the busy royal chambers Lyra was used to, The walls were covered in rusted panels, and the air was thick with the scent of dust and old equipment. It was a place of silence, a place for hiding. But, for now, it was the only place where Lyra could find peace, even if just for a moment. Kyle had already started unloading supplies from the ship. He worked quickly, his movements precise, as if he was used to such tasks. The calmness in his actions gave Lyra a strange sense of comfort. She had seen many soldiers in her life, powerful, brave, but often self-serving. Kyle was different. There was something about him that made her feel like she wasn't just another queen to be protected, but a person who was worth fighting for. For the first time in a long while, Lyra allowed herself to rest. She sat in the corner of the station, her back against the cold metal walls, her mind racing. The journey had been long and tiring, but there was more to think about than her own exhaustion. The galaxy was in chaos, and her people depended on her. But now, after everything that had happened, she didn't know what to do. Cale glanced over at her and saw the quiet struggle in her eyes. He had always been able to sense when someone was fighting an inner battle, and he knew Lyra was no exception. Despite the calm that seemed to surround her, he could see the weight she carried, the weight of a kingdom, a dying empire, and the future of her people. After a moment of silence, Kyle spoke. "You should get some rest. I'll keep watch." Lyra shook her head, though she didn't argue. "I've rested enough," she said, her voice steady. "I've been running for so long, I forgot what it feels like to be still." Kyle walked over to where she sat, crouching beside her. "You're allowed to be still for a while. You don't have to fight everything at once." She met his gaze, her purple eyes filled with a mixture of gratitude and uncertainty. "I never asked for this," she said softly. "I never wanted to be queen. It was thrust upon me when I was too young, too unprepared. Now I'm a prisoner, and I'm not sure I know how to lead anymore." Cale didn't respond right away. He understood her pain more than she might have realized. He, too, had lost things: his family, his home, his sense of normalcy, during the war. But through it all he had kept going, not because he had to, but because he believed in something bigger than himself. He believed in hope. He believed in the idea that no matter how dark the galaxy became, there was always a chance for something better. "You don't have to do it alone," Kyle said gently. "I'm here, and if you'll let me, I'll help you rebuild what's been lost." Lyra looked down at her hands, the soft glow of the station's lights reflecting in her eyes. She had spent so many years thinking of herself as the leader of her people, the one who could never show weakness. But Cale's words, simple, sincere, made something shift inside her. Maybe she didn't have to carry the entire galaxy on her shoulders. Maybe, for the first time in her life, she could trust someone else. After a long pause, Lyra nodded, though she still wasn't sure what the future held. "Thank you, Cale. I'm not sure what's next for me, for us. But you've given me something I haven't had in a long time. Hope." Cale smiled softly, a sense of relief washing over him. "That's a good start." The days that followed were filled with quiet moments. Cale showed Lyra how to operate the old systems in the research station. They spent hours talking about the past, about their worlds, about the galaxy. Cale learned more about Lyra's people, the Lyrans. They were a proud species, known for their wisdom and intelligence. But their empire had begun to crumble under the weight of corruption and war. Lyra had always been a symbol of hope for her people, but now she was a symbol of something else: weakness, fear, uncertainty. Lyra, in turn, learned about Kyle's life as a soldier. He spoke little about his past, but she could tell that his experiences had shaped him in ways he couldn't quite express. He was a man of action, not words, but in his silence, there was a quiet strength. One evening, as the stars glittered in the sky outside the station, Cale walked over to Lyra, who was sitting on the small observation deck looking out into the vastness of space. The silence between them felt natural now, like a shared understanding that needed no words. "Do you ever wonder if this is all worth it?" Lyra asked suddenly, her voice distant. Kyle glanced at her, his expression thoughtful. "All of it? The war, the fighting, or everything?" She nodded. "Sometimes I feel like I'm just one person in an endless struggle. I can't fix it all. No one can." Kyle took a seat beside her, gazing out at the stars as well. "You're right. No one person can fix everything. But that doesn't mean we stop trying." Lyra turned to him, her expression serious. "Do you really believe that? Even after all that's happened?" "I do," Cale said without hesitation. "We're here, aren't we? You're alive because I didn't give up. And I'm here because you didn't give up. It's the small things, the little choices that make all the difference." Lyra studied him for a long time. She had spent her entire life being told that she had to be perfect, that she had to be the answer to everything. But here, with Kyle, she realized that maybe it was okay to not have all the answers. Maybe it was enough just to try. For the first time in a long while, Lyra felt a small spark of something she hadn't felt in years. Hope. Hope that the future wasn't set in stone, that there was still time to change things. Hope that with Cale by her side, she could do more than just survive. She could lead. "I think you're right," she said quietly. "Maybe it's enough to just try." Cale smiled, his eyes soft. "It's all we can do." And for the first time, Lyra truly believed it. The days at the research station were calm, but not without purpose. Lyra had begun to regain her strength, though the memories of her capture still haunted her thoughts. Cale was patient, always offering support when she needed it, yet giving her the space she craved to reflect. They spent hours in conversation, mapping out possible plans for her return to her people. The situation was dire. The rival factions had grown stronger in her absence, and the inner turmoil within her empire had only deepened. Lyra's absence had left a power vacuum that no one could fill, and her enemies were preparing to strike. It had been nearly 2 weeks since their escape, and Cale had been restless. He knew that staying hidden wasn't a long-term solution. Lyra had to return to her people, not just to reclaim her throne, but to restore hope. The galaxy needed her. One evening, Kyle sat by the old comms equipment in the corner of the station, his brow furrowed as he tried to access any messages or information from the outside. Lyra walked in quietly, her eyes scanning the room as she approached him. "What are you doing?" she asked, her voice calm but tinged with curiosity. "I'm trying to make contact with any allies of yours," Cale said, not looking up. "I know you said you don't trust your council, but there must be someone out there who can help us. Someone who still believes in you." Lyra crossed her arms and leaned against the wall, watching him. "There might be," she said, her voice uncertain. "But I can't just rely on others to solve this. I've been running from my responsibilities for too long." Kyle finally turned to face her. "Running from your responsibilities won't change anything. Your people need you to lead. You're the only one who can unite them." Lyra met his gaze, the weight of his words sinking in. "I'm not sure I'm ready. I don't know if I can fix everything that's broken." "You don't have to fix everything," Cale said, standing up and walking toward her. "You just need to show them that they're not alone, that you're still the queen they believed in." Lyra's expression softened, and for a moment, she seemed to consider his words. She had always seen herself as the symbol of her people, their leader in the face of all adversity. But in her time of weakness, she had forgotten what it meant to truly lead. "I've spent so much time trying to be perfect, trying to be the ruler they wanted," she said, her voice quiet. "But maybe I've been looking at it all wrong." Kyle smiled, a small but genuine smile. Maybe it's time to stop trying to be perfect and start being real. That's what your people need. Someone they can relate to, someone who can guide them through this storm. Lyra stared at him for a long time, her heart heavy with doubt, but also with a growing sense of clarity. She didn't need to be perfect. She just needed to be herself. And if Kyle believed in her, maybe there was still hope. The next day, Kyle set the coordinates for a nearby space station, a neutral zone where they could make contact with her supporters. They had no guarantee that anyone would still be loyal, but they couldn't stay hidden forever. They had to take a risk. As the ship approached the station, Lyra's mind raced with thoughts of the past. The last time she had visited this station, she had been a symbol of hope, standing strong at the helm of her empire. Now, she was just a fugitive, a queen in hiding. She felt the weight of the galaxy's expectations pressing down on her. "I don't know if I can do this, Kale," Lyra said, her voice barely above a whisper. "What if they've already turned against me?" Kyle, who had been focused on the ship's controls, glanced over at her. "Then we'll face it together. You don't have to do this alone." Lyra looked at him, her eyes searching his face for any sign of doubt. But all she saw was unwavering support, something she hadn't felt in a long time. He wasn't just a soldier anymore. He was her ally, her friend, maybe even more than that. When they docked at the station, the air was thick with tension. They made their way through the station's corridors, keeping their heads low. It was a neutral zone, but there were always spies lurking, and Lyra couldn't afford to take any chances. Her heart pounded in her chest as they approached the meeting room where she was supposed to meet her contact. As they entered, they were greeted by a tall figure in a long cloak, their face hidden beneath a hood. Kyle's hand instinctively went to the blaster at his side, but Lyra held up a hand, signaling him to stay calm. The figure spoke, their voice low and gravelly. "You've come back, Your Highness." Lyra stepped forward, her voice steady. "I never left, but the galaxy has changed, and I need your help." The figure pulled back their hood to reveal a familiar face, Commander Vera, a trusted ally from Lyra's past. Her face was older now, lined with the struggles of the war, but her eyes still held the same fierce loyalty Lyra had once seen in her. "I never thought I'd see the day," Vera said, her voice tinged with emotion. "But I knew you'd come. Back. The galaxy needs you, Lyra. The people need you." Lyra felt a wave of relief wash over her. "I'm not sure I can fix everything. The council, the factions. It's all falling apart." Viera stepped closer, her eyes filled with determination. "You don't have to fix it all, Your Highness, but you can unite them. The people still believe in you. They always will." Lyra glanced at Kale, who stood nearby, watching with quiet pride. She knew he was right. She didn't have to be perfect. She didn't have to save the galaxy by herself. But with allies like Vera, and with Kale by her side, she could bring her people back together. "Then let's do it," Lyra said, her voice firm with newfound resolve. "It's time to lead again." The small fleet gathered at the edge of the galaxy was quiet, its ships hidden among the stars, waiting for the right moment to strike. Lyra stood at the helm of the command ship, looking out into the vastness of space. It had been weeks since she had begun the journey back to her people, and every step felt like a test. She had never imagined that her return would come with so much doubt, so much fear. But here she was, standing on the threshold of what could either be the beginning of a new chapter or the end of everything she had fought for. Kale stood beside her, his presence a constant reminder that she wasn't alone. He had never once questioned her decision to return to the heart of her empire, even when the risks were clear. His loyalty had become a foundation she hadn't known she needed. And now, standing together in the silence of space, She could feel the weight of everything on her shoulders. The galaxy was still in chaos, but there was a flicker of hope that hadn't been there before. "How do you feel?" Kyle asked, his voice breaking the silence. Lyra took a deep breath, her eyes fixed on the stars ahead. "I feel ready, but scared. I've spent so long running from this moment, and now it's here." "You've already come this far," Kale said with a quiet confidence. "Whatever happens, you've already taken the hardest step." Lyra turned to him, a small smile tugging at the corners of her lips. "I wouldn't have come this far without you." Kyle gave her a small, knowing smile. "You're stronger than you think, Lyra. I'm just here to help you find that strength again." The command ship's comms beeped, and the voice of Commander Vera crackled through the speaker. "Your Highness, we're ready to move out. The fleet is in position." Lyra nodded, her heart pounding. It was time. She took one last look at Kyle, then turned to face the rest of the crew. The mission they were about to embark on was dangerous. The factions who had risen in her absence would not welcome her return, but she had made a promise to her people and to herself that she would reclaim her place as their queen. The fleet moved through the darkness of space, its ships moving in perfect unison, ready to strike when the time was right. The first target was a large enemy stronghold, a symbol of the power that had risen in Lyra's absence. As they approached, the tension on the command ship grew thick. Lyra could feel it in the air, the weight of every decision she had made, leading up to this moment. "You're sure about this?" Kyle asked, his voice steady but with a trace of concern. "We don't know how many of them are waiting for us." Lyra turned to him, her eyes filled with a quiet resolve. "I'm sure. We can't afford to wait any longer. The people need to see that I'm still their queen. If I hide any longer, they'll think I'm afraid." Kale nodded, understanding the weight of her words. "Then we fight." As the fleet neared the stronghold, Lyra's mind raced. She had spent years being told that she wasn't enough, that she was too young, too untested, too weak to lead. But in these past weeks, something had changed. She had learned that strength didn't come from perfection. It came from the courage to stand up, to fight for what mattered, no matter the odds. "Commander Vera," Lyra said, her voice firm. "Prepare to launch the assault." "Understood, Your Highness," came the reply. "We'll be ready." The first wave of ships launched from the fleet, cutting through the space between them and the enemy stronghold. Lyra stood at the command center, her hands gripping the armrests of her chair as she watched the battle unfold. The enemy ships were formidable, but Lyra's fleet was faster, more agile. It was their best chance to reclaim control, and she wasn't going to let it slip away. "Target their defense systems," Lyra ordered, her voice cold and calculated. "Take down their shields, then move in. No hesitation." The ships responded instantly, a coordinated effort to disable the enemy's defenses. Lyra's heart raced as she watched the explosion of enemy firepower, but she didn't flinch. She couldn't afford to show weakness now. The people needed to see that she was still in control. The battle raged on for what felt like hours, the sound of weapons fire filling the ship's halls. But Lyra stayed focused, her eyes locked on the battle below. The enemy's stronghold was crumbling under the pressure. Her forces were making progress, but the cost was high. Ships were damaged, and casualties began to mount. Lyra's chest tightened as she watched the figures flicker across the command screen. "How much longer?" Kale asked, standing beside her, his voice urgent. "Just a little longer," Lyra said, her voice steady. "We can do this." As the final blow was struck, the enemy fleet fell back, retreating from the battlefield. The stronghold's defenses collapsed, leaving the space around it in ruins. Lyra watched, her breath caught in her throat, as her fleet secured victory. They had done it. She had done it. The room erupted in cheers, the crew celebrating their hard-won victory. But Lyra couldn't let herself get caught up in the moment. She had a mission to complete. Her people were still waiting for her, and this victory was just the beginning. Later that evening, after the celebrations had died down, Lyra stood alone on the command deck, looking out at the stars. The battle had been won, but the war was far from over. There was still much to do, still so much that needed to be repaired. Kyle approached her, his footsteps quiet. "You did it, Lyra. You showed them who you are." Lyra turned to face him, her eyes filled with a mixture of pride and uncertainty. "I couldn't have done it without you, Kale. You were right. I don't have to do this alone." He smiled, his gaze soft. "You never had to." Lyra took a deep breath, feeling the weight of her responsibilities settle on her once again. But this time, it didn't feel as heavy. She wasn't alone. She had Kale, and she had the people who believed in her. "We're not done yet," she said, quietly. "But we will be. Together." And for the first time in a long while, Lyra felt the stirring of hope in her chest. The future was uncertain, but it was hers to shape. And with Kale by her side, she was ready for whatever came next. The stars were brilliant, twinkling in the darkness of space like countless eyes watching over them. Lyra stood on the bridge of the command ship, her hands resting lightly on the railing. The battle was over. The factions that had threatened her empire had been pushed back. But even in the quiet after the storm, she felt a deep, constant hum in her chest, something both calming and unsettling. It had been a long, hard journey, filled with moments of doubt and uncertainty, but now Lyra could see the path ahead clearly. She had returned to her people, and they had rallied behind her. Together, they had shown the galaxy that the Lyran Empire was not finished. But this victory, though important, was only the beginning. There was still so much to do, so much to rebuild. Kyle entered the bridge quietly, as he always did, his eyes scanning the room before settling on Lyra. She looked at him, the faintest trace of a smile on her lips. "You did it," Kyle said, softly. "You brought them together. You've proven that you can lead." Lyra turned to face him fully, her gaze steady. "It wasn't just me," she replied, her voice calm but firm. "It was all of us, the people, my allies, and yes, even you, Kale. Without you, I wouldn't have made it this far." Kale's expression softened, his eyes full of understanding. "You've always had the strength inside you, Lyra. You just had to find it again." She nodded, looking out at the stars once more. "I thought I was weak. I thought I had to do it all alone. But I've learned that strength comes from letting others in, from trusting them. I couldn't have done this without you by my side." The quiet hum of the ship was the only sound between them as Lyra considered her next words. "I was wrong to hide. I was wrong to think that I could run from my responsibilities, but now I know I can't turn away from them again." Kyle stepped closer to her, his presence grounding her. "And you don't have to do it alone anymore." Lyra turned to him, her heart swelling with gratitude. "I know. I don't want to. You've shown me that it's okay to lean on others, to trust them with the weight of leadership." The silence between them was not heavy, but comfortable. Lyra could feel a bond between them growing stronger, a shared understanding that went beyond words. Kale had been her ally, her protector, but he had also become her friend. In a galaxy filled with enemies and uncertainty, he was the one person she knew she could count on. The days after the battle were filled with difficult decisions. The factions that had once threatened the Empire were now retreating, but their influence still lingered. The damage had been done, and it would take time to rebuild what had been lost. Lyra spent her days meeting with her advisors, discussing ways to unite the fractured empire and making plans for a lasting peace. Kale, ever by her side, helped her navigate the delicate politics of the situation. He was not a politician, but his insight and honesty were invaluable. He was a soldier, yes, but he had seen enough of the galaxy to understand the deeper currents at play. One evening, as Lyra sat alone in her quarters, she thought about everything that had happened. The war, the rescue, her fears, her victories. But what stood out to her the most was the realization she had come to. She was not defined by her title, her crown, or even her past mistakes. She was defined by her choices, and in the end, those choices were what would shape the future. Kyle knocked softly on the door before entering, a rare look of seriousness on his face. "There's something you need to see," he said, motioning for her to follow. Lyra followed him down the corridors of the ship, her curiosity piqued. They stopped at a large observation window, where the vast expanse of space stretched out before them. But it wasn't the stars that caught her attention. It was the ships that were arriving. A fleet, massive and diverse, was making its way toward the command ship. "What is this?" she asked, her voice filled with a mix of wonder and confusion. "This," Kale said, "is your future." The ships were filled with Lyran people, refugees from the outer colonies, those who had been displaced during the war. They had come to join Lyra, to fight for their home, to rebuild what had been lost. The sight of so many ships, so many lives, all gathered together filled Lyra with a sense of awe. "They're here for you," Kale continued. "They believe in you. They believe in what you can do." Lyra felt a lump in her throat as she looked at the ships, her mind racing. These people had been through so much, and they were placing their trust in her to lead them. The weight of that trust was both humbling and terrifying, but in that moment she knew this was what she had been fighting for. This was why she had returned. Not for the power or the title, but for the chance to build something better, something worth fighting for. "I don't know if I can live up to this," she whispered, her voice full of doubt. Kale turned to her, his eyes filled with quiet conviction. "You don't have to be perfect. You just have to be real. You're already doing it, Lyra. You've already brought them together." She took a deep breath, feeling the weight of her crown once again, but this time it didn't feel as heavy. She wasn't alone. She had Kyle. She had her people. And together, they could rebuild. "I won't let them down," Lyra said, her voice firm, filled with a newfound determination. "I'll do whatever it takes to make sure their faith in me isn't misplaced." Kale nodded, a small smile tugging at the corners of his lips. "I know you will." As the fleet continued to arrive, Lyra stood at the window, watching the ships approach. She felt a sense of peace settle over her, a peace she had never known before. She wasn't the perfect queen the galaxy had once expected her to be, but she was the queen her people needed, and that was enough.